How does a four-star linebacker out of Ohio sound? Well, Dante McClellan appears to be trending toward Missouri, showing that this really could be the highest-ranked class ever coming out of high school for Mizzou football. So let's talk about that and some hoops, too, coming up right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. On today's program, I'm going to talk about a couple big-time visitors making their way to Columbia in June to check out the Mizzou football program. And on the basketball side, an event in the Kansas City area yesterday gave me a pretty strong clue about the future of one Tiger basketball player. But before we get there, I do want to tell you guys that this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150. Win or lose, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And you know what? Later in the program, actually at the end of this block here, during the FanDuel read, I'm going to give you guys a parlay that may just get you started over there at FanDuel. So look forward to that. But we want to start talking about, of course, as I teased in the cold open there, Dante McClellan seems like a really strong lean for Missouri right now. Four-star linebacker out of the state of Ohio, which I find really interesting because number one, normally Missouri not getting a ton of players out of the state of Pennsylvania, much less the number 2 overall quarterback in the country in Matt Zollers, according to On3.com. Well, speaking of On3, Steve Wiltfong logged what they call an expert prediction over there at On3 for Missouri to land the highly touted Dante McClellan. And really, McClellan not really on Missouri's radar until this past February when he picked up a Tiger offer late in the process after taking visits with Kentucky, Louisville. I shouldn't say taking visits, but he announced a top 8 of Kentucky, Louisville, Michigan State, Pittsburgh, Rutgers, Tennessee, among others. So obviously some really strong schools in there, including the Tennessee Volunteers. But a few short days after he released his top 8, Eli Drinkwitz snuck in through the back door, offered the kid, and, well, it seems like a really strong play is being made for this young man. And often when Missouri wants to close on a recruit these days, sure seems like they're doing it. No doubt that NIL is a part of that. Eli Drinkwitz and his own cult of personality, if you will, certainly a part of that as well. And speaking of Matt Zollers, who, as I just said, over at On3, moved up to the 2nd overall quarterback in the country, according to them, the 17th overall player as well, regardless of position at On3. So they're really high on Zollers, much higher than Rivals.com, for instance, who still has Zollers as a 4-star player. So it's not as though they're down on him, but apparently they're just buying into, over at On3, more of the Zollers upside, which I can certainly see. The athletic upside is really obvious, especially for a kid who, relatively speaking, doesn't have maybe as much experience at quarterback, the sort of 7-on-7 type camps, that type of stuff where you get even more exposure. He's a high-rising prospect for a reason, and hopefully one that Missouri is going to hold on to. Generally speaking, you get a quarterback that early in the process, as long as you don't have a coaching change or anything like that. Kirby Moore, reportedly the lead recruiter there, clearly he's not going anywhere this season. Maybe in the future, we'll see, but regardless, got to keep Zollers in the fold. That's looking very possible, especially he's going to take his, as he said, he's only going to take one official visit, and that's going to be to the team that he committed to. Well, the weekend of June 21st through the 23rd, I believe, definitely in June, but also Jayvan Boggs visiting as well, the former Ohio State commit. Well, that's all you need to know. An Ohio State wide receiver commit. If Ohio State wants them, wants a wide receiver, that means that Missouri and anybody in the country would like that young man as well. So Jayvan Boggs visiting with potentially his future quarterback and Matt Zollers. Really interesting recruiting weekend that I'm sure there's going to be a ton of other names that we'll get to as we get closer, as we approach June. We'll certainly get to all of those as well. But all of this basically with Dante McClellan. Again, how many times does Missouri get a 4-star player out of Ohio? Typically, Missouri really doesn't even recruit Ohio very much. Now, of course, famously, Brad Smith was from Youngstown, right? But he was very much an under-the-radar prospect. Missouri was his only major offer that I recall, if I'm remembering correctly now, from 25 years ago of Brad Smith's recruitment to Missouri. But regardless, the point is you're just seeing unprecedented things happening at Missouri right now. And even though we've obviously had 5-star recruits before, big-time recruits, guys, we're talking top 5 type players in the country like Luther Burton very recently. Heck, even Williams Winery, who's going to be playing on Missouri's defensive line this fall. But once again, all of this is just telling me, those are kids from Missouri, by the way. Dorial Green-Beckham, Sheldon Richardson, Blaine Gabbert, the same deal. Sure, Missouri they'll occasionally close on a big-time prospect from in-state. Out of state, more and more you're seeing Missouri close on these kind of kids. So to me, this just looks more and more likely with each passing day and week. Like this is going to be the highest ranked class in Mizzou football history. At the very least in the internet era. Now we can go back and argue about the 60s and 70s if you want to talk high school ball from the 70s, but at least in the internet era, since we as journalists, as rankers, as analysts have started doing this kind of stuff. I'm using the royal we here, not me literally. But yeah, this is going to be the number 1 class in Missouri history. If I was making bets over at FanDuel, I would definitely bet on that. And you know what? Since I brought up Luther Burton just a little bit ago, CBS Sportsline put out its top 100 college football players entering the 2024 season. Luther Burton checking in number 5 overall in the entire country. Brady Cook, of course, the Mizzou starting quarterback, number 49. And I just think the Burton number there, just another indication that he's going to be getting tremendous amounts of hype for this coming season, probably going to be talked about as the best wide receiver in college football entering 2024. I know what the history is about those guys, and by those guys I mean receivers winning the Heisman Trophy. It doesn't happen very often. I very much understand that. Devonta Smith did it in 2020, but he is very much, generally speaking, the exception to the rule. But as I laid out before, I just think with the requisite hype that Burton got when you saw Cody Schrader finish top 10 in Heisman voting last year, while having basically no hype until at least the month of October or November last season. See, Burton is going to have the advantage there over Schrader or somebody who would be flying under the radar that would sort of come out of nowhere relatively like Schrader did last season. Well, that's not going to be the case for Luther Burton, and all that national attention and an air that he's going to be sucking up, that absolutely matters. So to me, at 100-1, I still think he's pretty interesting over there at FanDuel Sportsbook, And you know what? Coming up, let's talk a little bit of basketball too. There's quite a bit of goings on happening behind the scenes right now for sure with Missouri basketball. I'm going to try to parse through all of that, and especially there is one guy it seems pretty obvious is coming back next season based on yesterday's event in the Kansas City area. So let's talk about that in a little bit. But I've also got a parlay for you over at FanDuel Sportsbook, and it is playoff time in the NBA and NHL, but baseball is also in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets. Guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. But I got to tell you, I like the Cardinals and the Royals today. Just parlay them both to win against the Oakland Athletics and the Chicago White Sox. Yes, both teams are on the road, but those are maybe the two absolute worst teams in baseball right now, certainly in the American League. I think the Royals are off to a great start. Obviously, the Cardinals are just much better than the Oakland A's. So let's slap those two together, and you get a nice little payout, plus 159. Again, if the Cardinals and the Royals win this afternoon, or this evening, I should say. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and make your first bet an automatic win. It's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And as you can probably guess, I definitely have a competitive side. And my competitive side is a big fan of Monopoly Go. I'm sure you've heard of it. It has been downloaded over 150 million times. I'll just tell you, it's a great twist on Monopoly where you can play on not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards and all types of crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. But the best part, frankly, I love messing with my friends. I can charge them rent on my iconic properties, just like classic Monopoly. But now I can also rob their vaults of riches for myself. And the leaderboards show me who is the biggest Monopoly tycoon of all. But it's not just my competitive side that loves Monopoly Go. You can team up with friends and people all around the world in timed tournaments to earn huge rewards. So get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. And tomorrow it's time once again for Locked On's NFL Mock Draft Live. Again, tomorrow at 6 o'clock Central Time, streaming on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV Channels app. Of course, you'll get the analysis from the NFL teams, that Locked On host, and, of course, your college perspective as well, even the fantasy football angle. It's Locked On NFL Mock Draft tomorrow at 6 Central, streaming live on Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV Channels app. So on the basketball side of things, Tonje, the Missouri guard, has entered the transfer portal. He came from Colorado State last season to quite a bit of fanfare, at least from Dennis Gates and his staff. But Tonje, just for whatever reason, mostly injury, quite frankly, I shouldn't say for whatever reason, he just had foot problems that he just was never able to quite get over this season. And, well, obviously it wasn't what either side expected. What I do expect now, though, with him officially on the way out, according to On3.com, I'd expect some more movement in this week pretty soon as well. Who exactly that could be? Well, Javon Porter still looking pretty likely if you read the tea leaves. I know Missouri's in very strong pursuit of Mark Mitchell as well, the former Duke player. And one thing to note for sure yesterday, Tamar Bates and Aiden Shaw were both at the KC Come Home event, I believe at Chicken and Pickle in Overland Park yesterday. Well, that just tells me right away. I think we all knew Tamar Bates was about 99% to come back. All indications were that. But it sure seems like Aiden Shaw is definitely going to be sticking around as well if he's publicly going out there at this point. You'll notice that other players like, for example, Trent Pierce, Jordan Butler, at the moment, they're not exactly out there. And as we break down the roster here, it's kind of being harder to see either one of those young forwards coming back. And as far as Shaw goes, how much he contributes next season does remain to be seen. But I am glad he's sticking around. He's obviously got an incredible athletic upside. One of the bounciest guys, the most explosively athletic, highest leapers in Mizzou history, I would certainly say, especially at that size of 6'8" or so. There's just a lot there, I think. A good kid who works hard, plays hard. I just think there's more there. I think he showed more in high school offensively than he's shown so far in college as well. So maybe the third year will be the breakout that I was looking for, frankly, in the second year for Aidan Shaw. But you start looking at this Missouri roster, and it's getting pretty crowded basketball-wise. Now, Dennis Gates has openly said that, hey, basically, we'll take as many guys as we can get, and we'll figure it out. In terms of scholarship limits, that's kind of old thinking, because with NIL, guys can be on scholarship without really having a scholarship. They can just get an NIL package instead to essentially pay for school and beyond. This has become a pretty common tactic, again, one that Dennis Gates has openly talked about. Certainly Buzz Williams at Texas A&M has done something similar as well. But while that all sounds great in theory, and if you're running your franchise mode or your dynasty mode in a video game or something, sure, just stack talent, because they're all just a bunch of bits in a computer or a DVD anyway, right? They aren't real human beings. But of course, on an actual basketball team, you're dealing with real human beings. And at a certain point, if you have 15, 16 guys on your roster, guys that are scholarship caliber type of players, well, inevitably, a whole bunch of those guys are going to be upset. At least about half of them. If it's 16, how many guys realistically play? 8 or 9? And as we saw last season, attempting to play 10, 11, 12 guys, there's a real obvious law of diminishing returns there. And anybody who's ever played basketball at any serious level knows that it's a lot easier to play effectively when you're getting a decent amount of minutes, especially, again, if you're a good player that's used to getting up shots, having the ball in your hand, that type of thing. It's just, to me, it's not realistic to have that many players on your roster. So I think inevitably you're going to see more attrition here. When you look at it, I do think Anthony Robinson seems fairly likely to stick around just based on next year. Tony Perkins, of course, the Iowa transfer I talked at length about yesterday at the top of the program, he is really your only lead guard and point guard on the roster as of now. Could Missouri get another point guard in the portal? Sure, anything is possible in the portal. But I'd say Robinson looks pretty likely to stick around. Of course, Bates is going to be back. Seems like Missouri wants Caleb Grill back. Of course, Jacob Cruz is going to play. He was the first portal addition. Anor Boateng, the highest-ranked player, freshman incoming. Perhaps, let's assume maybe Mark Mitchell and Jayvan Porter, just for the sake of discussion. Missouri's going to take at least a couple front court players, I would say. So regardless if it's those two guys or somebody else, now you're talking Peyton Marshall coming in as maybe my favorite player of this incoming freshman class, plus Aidan Shaw. I've already listed 10 guys there, and that doesn't even include the other 3 freshmen that are coming in. So that's 13 guys. Plus, is Caleb Brown going to be back as a walk-on? It's just getting really difficult to see Trent Pierce and Jordan Butler both coming back in that scenario, really either one of them. So that's the thing. Since Perkins is only here for a season, since Missouri really only has one point guard, and that is Perkins, I do expect Anthony Robinson to stay around, but he might be the only one of this past season's Missouri freshman class. One thing's for sure, even after an 0-19 SEC campaign, 8-24 overall, one of the most disappointing Missouri basketball seasons of all time, well, the NIL support has not been drying up whatsoever. Obviously, we talked a lot about football in the first half of the program, but basketball seems to be plugging along just fine in terms of NIL as well. This is good news for Dennis Gates in the short term. But as we've seen recently with John Calipari, with Eric Musselman, really the whole Arkansas situation, well, that can be a bit of a fickle mistress, relying on NIL, can't it? But that appears to be the world that we're in. So let's talk about that and an eye-popping price out there for Tony Perkins. Let's talk about all that here in just a little bit. First, though, I do want to tell you about LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. And I got to say, I'm lucky enough, our small business, that is, well, mostly my wife and sister-in-law's small business, they found 4 young ladies, maybe 5, 4 or 5 young ladies that have just been a tremendous help to our small business. And LinkedIn is going to help you find exactly those type of candidates. And you know what? On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Now, if I were Iowa coach Fran McCaffery, and I believed, as Coach McCaffery does, that we needed at least $500,000 to retain Tony Perkins, our 4-year point guard, but yet somehow Missouri and Dennis Gates, after they just went 0-19, can scrounge up that kind of dough. I think if that were me, I'd be on one of McCaffrey's signature profanity-laced tirades there for sure, because I'd be going, wait a second, why? I've done pretty well at Iowa here recently, but here's the deal. This is obviously good news for Dennis Gates, and it gives this whole situation, if that's true, if anything like that is true, and I don't really have a reason to doubt Coach McCaffery at this point, well, this is going to give Gates a heck of a chance to turn it around in year 3 here for sure. But it does sort of show the dynamic in college basketball and how boosters, well, they've always had a bunch of power, but my goodness, maybe more than ever, because if you believe all the tea leaves and all the reporting down in Arkansas, I've been curious about that whole basketball situation down there. It's been really interesting to follow because at first, hey, I was the one who reported, speculated even based on a lot of speculation down in Arkansas all the way back in January. I don't think Eric Musselman is long for this Arkansas job. And I had a lot of Hogs fans come at me in the comments saying how wrong I was. Well, obviously, I knew a little bit of something there. Again, just based mostly on reading stuff online from people who have real credibility down in the Fayetteville area. But the whole dynamic there, it's not as though Eric Musselman, the reason probably the Arkansas fans, to be fair to them, if they're not following this stuff as close as I was, the off-the-court dynamics here, we'd be going, why in the heck would Eric Musselman leave? He just got a great recruiting class. Things are going well. He's made the Elite Eight a couple times. Hey, fine and dandy. I get that at first glance. The problem is, apparently, one of the most important families in terms of NIL, I believe the Hunt family, who's a part of a Hunt shipping company down there. You've probably seen them on I-70 a million times. Well, once they turned on Eric Musselman, seemed like a lot of other people did too. And it was just sort of, hey, this is not the key. This is not exactly the alignment we want here down in Fayetteville. So instead, obviously the Razorbacks turned to John Calipari, who had a bunch of people up his butt in Kentucky all of a sudden too. Maybe some of those donations were starting to dry up, relatively speaking, to what Kentucky's upside is of terms of NIL. Again, that's just my own speculation. Much more likely is that Calipari just kind of saw the writing on the wall. At a certain point, he had lost the faith of a lot of Kentucky's fans, of Big Blue Nation, if you will. So the point is, hey, great for Dennis Gates that he seems to still have the support of the boosters right now. I'm just saying, man, that is a fickle mistress, isn't it? If even guys like Musselman and Calipari, who are really, really accomplished coaches, more so than Dennis Gates so far, if they can turn on you that quickly, well, be careful. That's all I can say. You better go for it now, and Dennis Gates better have a good season 3. That's for sure, because with the amount of money swishing around these days, maybe a $14 million buyout or whatever it might be at the end of next year, That's not quite as bad as it would have seemed, especially before Jerry Stackhouse reportedly got bought out for $15 million at Vanderbilt. I don't know if it's inflation or what the deal is, but the amount of money just sloshing around right now in college football and college basketball too is pretty freaking remarkable. So again, $500,000 for Tony Perkins, who's a really good player, by the way. Don't get me wrong, I'm thrilled that Missouri got Tony Perkins. As I said yesterday, I think he upgrades Missouri's athleticism, defense at the position, just at the point guard position. I think we'll just be better defensively, number one, and just a little bit better finishing in the lane. He's a really athletic guy, good size too, at 6'4". But again, second 10 all Big Ten. While that's a great player, he's not exactly Caitlin Clark, to use another Iowa player as an example. He's not exactly Zach Edey. He's not the number one player in the country. So $500,000, man, that really shocked me, to be honest, as an amount of money it takes to get a guy for one season to play basketball. Don't get me wrong, hey, good for him. I'm glad he got it. I got nothing against Tony Perkins securing his bag, as the kids like to say. I just thought that was kind of a shocking number, if indeed Fran McCaffrey is accurate with it. So, you know what? Thanks as always for listening to this edition of Locked On Mizzou. Coming up on the program this week, going to be lots of news. I'm not sure what. Hopefully some additions to the basketball team. Probably not as much exciting stuff with football, though you never know what's going to come up. But I'm expecting some additions and some subtractions from Mizzou basketball this week. So I'll have it all right here for you on Locked On Mizzou.